Matthew chapter 10, a very, very familiar portion of Scripture. Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore. Ye are of much more value than many sparrows. I wondered for a long time, why would Jesus use sparrows for an illustration as an example of God's care and God's concern for us? And so I did just a little bit of research. It really didn't take much to find out that sparrows were the birds of the poor. In Bible times, in fact, many countries today, they eat sparrows. I can't imagine it. But in poverty-stricken countries, sparrows are the most common of all the birds, and many times they're eaten, but they're eaten by the poor. So it represents the lowest of the low on the food chain. Also, I found out that when someone would go to the temple to offer a sacrifice, the wealthy people would buy a turtle dove or a quail to offer as a sacrifice. The poor people could only afford to buy a sparrow, because a sparrow you could buy a bag for $1. They were the cheapest of the cheapest, the most common of all of the birds. And Jesus is using this as an illustration that if he cares about the most common of the birds in nature, then he must care about us. Now, I want you to see a couple of things tonight. The first thing, if you're taking notes, and I encourage you to do that always, here it is. Number 1, verse 29. You ready? Sparrows fall. Sparrows fall. Now, the verse tells us very clearly that God knows about the sparrows. There is not a single sparrow that falls that God is not aware of, and yet they fall. Sparrows fall. Sparrows die. What's the lesson? I think the lesson there is that trouble, trials, tribulation, pain, suffering comes to everyone sooner or later. Sparrows do fall. I mentioned this morning, that I think one of the most serious heresies being taught today, that if you're a Christian, you have enough faith, you say the right words, you'll never ever suffer. Trials will not come to you. And nothing could be further from the truth. Christians are not exempt from suffering. You know, sometimes we'll see a tornado come and hit a community. The tornado comes in from the southwest and comes across the city. I got news. When the tornado comes to the home of a Christian family, it usually doesn't rise back up into the clouds, go over that Christian's house, and then come. But isn't that true? If a tornado comes into a city, it doesn't rise up, skip over the Christian's house, and then come back to the non-Christian. The storms hit everyone. Trials hit everyone. If you'll remember just a few years ago, down in Texas, on a Wednesday night, big mega church, evangelical mega church, there's a group of a couple hundred teenagers gathered together for Bible study and prayer on a Wednesday night. How often do teenagers go to church on Wednesday night? But they're there studying the Bible, they're praying. Some deranged person came in off the street with guns blazing, opened fire, and 2 or 3 of those kids were shot dead. In the church, Wednesday night, they're serving God, they're honoring God, they're praying, they're studying the Bible, and many people would say, well, a loving God would not allow that. I got news. Sparrows fall. You are not exempt from suffering. Your family is not exempt from trials. We live in a fallen world. Now, those things do not come to you apart from God and without God's knowledge, but they do happen. They do happen. So that's point number 1. Sparrows fall. But here's point number 2. Sparrows only fall according to God's plan. Sparrows only fall according to God's plan. Now, I cannot tell you how many times I have read Matthew chapter 10. In the last 50 years, I have read Matthew chapter 10. I am certain, I'm positive, hundreds of times, probably thousands of times, over and over and over again. And yet, just a few weeks ago, I saw something I had never seen before. Look at verse 29 again. Would you look with me? Verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father's knowledge? Is that what it says? Come on, I'm talking to you. You got to talk to me. All right? Is that what it says? It doesn't say without your Father's knowledge. But you know what? I thought that's what it said. I was certain that's what it said. That a sparrow cannot fall without God knowing about it, without God caring about it. That's not what it says. It just says a sparrow cannot fall what? Without your Father. It is more than just His knowledge. It's more than just His care. Even a sparrow cannot fall without it being a part of God's master plan. Now, if you look at the world today, how many sparrows do you think are on planet Earth today, and how many sparrows do you think fall? Millions? Billions? I don't know. You and I don't keep track of how many sparrows fall, but not only does God keep track of it, not only does God care about the sparrow, it says that there cannot be a sparrow that falls without your Father. It is impossible to exaggerate the sovereignty of God. It is impossible to comprehend the sovereignty of God. We often debate, well, did God cause that or did God allow that? Well, look at Job, all right? We know in the book of Job, we learn from that Satan has to come in and check in with God occasionally. Isn't that amazing? Satan has to come and check in with God. So one day, Satan is coming in and he's reporting into God. And they have a conversation. And look at this. God initiates it. God says to Satan, hey, have you considered my servant Job? There is nobody like him. And what does Satan say? Satan says, the only reason he serves you is because of the way you've blessed him. Look at the way he's living. He's in a big house. He's got a family of really cool kids. He's got a nice wife. And he's got all of this cattle and herds. He's a wealthy man. You have blessed him so much. If you take all that away, he will curse you to his face. And so what does God say? He's yours. Do anything you want. You just can't kill him. So, did God cause the suffering and the trials and the troubles of Job, which included not only the loss of all of his earthly possessions and the companionship of his wife? Remember what an encouragement she was? Just curse God and die. He lost his kids, right? He lost everything. He lost his health. So did God cause that, or did God allow it? Well, we would say, well, he allowed it because it was Satan that did all those things. Well, that's true. But could Satan have done any of those things without God's permission? No. So, theologians have been debating this for centuries. Did God cause it or did God allow it? Here's the bottom line. It doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter. It happened and God allowed it. So whether he caused it or whether he allowed it, it could not have happened unless it was part of God's sovereign plan for Job's life. Can I get an amen on that? Amen. So, God's sovereignty goes so very, very far. Even sparrows cannot fall unless it is part of God's divine, ultimate, supreme plan for this earth and this universe. I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but God never sits around in heaven and says, wow, I didn't see that coming. You know, God never says, wow, now that was a surprise. God never says, now what am I going to do? I didn't know he was going to do that. I didn't know she was going to do that. Now I got to change all of my plans because I didn't see that happening. Nothing ever surprises God. R.C. Sproul said this, God never rolls the dice. There is not one thing that happens that is apart from the hand of God and the plan of God and the purpose of God, even an individual sparrow falling. Now, how far does this knowledge and control extend? Well, Jesus chose to give us a very interesting illustration of that. Look in verse 30. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Now, do you think Jesus was in the habit of exaggerating? No, of course he wasn't. So if Jesus said, even the hairs of your head are numbered, did he mean that? Well, of course he did. Now, for some, that's a little easier. I won't mention any names. Can we order yet? Now, I did a little bit of research. You're going to be so edified when you leave here tonight. You'll be able to go and impress all of your friends tomorrow with this wonderful knowledge. I did a little research, and this is the absolute truth. The average head of hair, 100,000 individual hairs. Now that's the average. Again, some are slightly below average. Some are slightly above average. But on average, the average head of hair has 100,000 hairs. And on average, 50 fall out every single day. That's on average. Now, not only that, the average amount varies by color. It's true. Look it up. Just Google it, okay? It varies by color. Would anybody like to guess what color of hair has the most average hairs on their head? Blondes. Are you kidding me? Blondes. You're right. You're right. Get this. Brunettes average 105,000. You know who has the least, what color has the least number of hairs on their head on average? That's right, redheads. Redheads have an average of 90,000, brunettes have an average of 105,000, and blondes have an average of 140,000 hairs. Congratulations to all of you blondes. Natural or otherwise. And get this, God keeps track of every one of them. Now, on average, if it's 100,000 for each head, take a look around you, and here this evening in the crowd this size, we have at least a few million hairs on our heads. And Jesus said he keeps track of every single one of them. Now, I preached this message a few weeks ago for the very first time. And when I was preaching it, I said that One of the reasons for the success of our marriage, we've been married 47 and a half years now. If Joy keeps me till December, it'll be 48 years. And one of the secrets to that is that I am an absolutely wonderful, incredible, astounding husband. I thought at least one person would say amen, whose name shall not be mentioned, but starts with J. Now, why am I such a wonderful, incredible, astounding husband? Because usually, not always, but usually, when I get out of the shower, the last thing I do is I clean out the hair out of the drain. And I usually do. I usually do. And so I mentioned that. Last week, my wife says, you need to preach that his eye is on the sparrow message again. I said, oh, wow, thank you, thank you. She says, no, you need to preach his eye is on the sparrow again. Well, that's nice, thank you. I'm glad you like that message. She says, no, 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 no. You really need to preach his eye is on the sparrow again. And I'm going, what is the big deal? She said, did you look in the drain in the bathtub? I forgot. One time in 47 years. Well, maybe more than that. But you know what? That is one of the most disgusting things. I mean, you get out of the shower, and particularly if it's somebody else's hair, right? I mean, it's bad enough your own hair. You ever gone to a hotel? Ew, gross, ew, okay. I mean, if it's somebody else's hair, but, listen, instead of getting grossed out, the next time you clean the hair out of the drain, you hold it and you say, wow, God actually knows exactly how many hairs are there, and that's a proof that he cares for me. You see, we don't worry. You know, I've never laid in bed at night and said, oh, number 567, are you okay up there? Don't let go, I need all of you. That's something we don't know about, something we don't care about. But Jesus said, the very hairs of your head are numbered, every single one of them. And the point is, God is a God of details. In Psalm 147, the Word of God says that God has numbered all of the stars and called them by name. He's numbered all the stars and called them by name. Well, I did a little bit of research on that too. In the observable universe, that's the universe that we can see with our electronic telescopes now. In the observable universe, astronomers tell us that they approximate that there are 1 billion trillion stars in the observable universe. 1 billion trillion. You know what that is? That is 1 followed by 21 zeros. 1 followed by 21 zeros. 1 billion trillion stars. And guess what? My God has a name for every single one of them. And not only that, let me give you this illustration. If we could fill this entire auditorium with salt, grains of salt, from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, could you imagine how many grains of salt that would be? Billions. But guess what? Even if we were to fill this entire sanctuary with salt, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, that would still not be 1 billion trillion. But we could use that as an illustration of the observable universe, and every one of those little individual grains of salt would be a star. Now, which one would be our star? The sun. Well, the sun would be one of those grains of salt in here. But then what about the earth? Well, the earth, you ready? The earth would be 1,000,000 times smaller than that individual grain of salt. You with me? The grains of salt would be each star. Our star would be one of them. The earth would be 1,000,000 times smaller than that one grain of salt. And then, on that little grain that's 1,000,000 times smaller than the single grain, you would have to put 7 billion little tiny spots on that. And each one of those 7 billion spots would represent you and I. Do you understand how small we are when compared to the universe? And not only does God have a name for every one of those billion, trillion stars, He knows my name. And He knows everything. He knows everything about me. And He still loves me. Jesus said, the very hairs of your head are numbered. And here's the third point, and I'll finish. Because of this, God's care for details should drive away fear. God's care for details should drive away fear. Look at verse 31. Fear ye not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. You see the point? What is Jesus saying? He gave us this illustrations about the sparrows and the hares to show us that if He cares about those things, you are so much more important than sparrows and hares, and therefore you should never, ever, ever be afraid, because God is in control and you are part of His sovereign plan. Now, how did this message come about? What prompted this message? Well, if you look behind the church, there's a motorhome back there. Doesn't belong to us. It belongs to some dear friends of ours. And they've had it for a few years, and when they're not using it, they allow us to use it. It's just wonderful. We used it a year ago when we were here, and it's parked out back. Well, a few weeks ago, it had been in winter storage all winter, and it was parked at a storage facility up there in Columbus. And I called the fellow who owns it. His name is Larry, and I said, Joy and I are going somewhere on ministry. Do you have any plans for using the RV before then? He says, no. He says, in fact, you can get it out of storage, de-winterize it, because you got to flush the tanks and get the antifreeze out and all that stuff. He says, you can do all of that, and of course you can use it. So I said, okay, that's great. So I'm one of these people, I hate to be late. I just despise being late. And so we were leaving for someplace, and I had it all planned out. I was going to go over to the storage facility, get the motorhome out, put my car in. I was going to take it to the gas station, fill it up with gas. I was going to bring it home. It would take about an hour and a half to flush all the tanks and all that, and then we would load it, and we'd be on the road at such and such a time. Everything was cool. So I go over to the storage place, get in the motorhome, pull it up, pull my car in, and I drive up to the gas station. And I park it, and I put the nozzle in the gas tank, and I, click it on. The thing's got a 75-gallon tank. 75 gallons. So anyway, I'm filling it up, and I got some time on my hands, so I'm walking around, and I go around to the rear of the motorhome, and it's got a trailer hitch on it. On top of the trailer hitch is a little bird nest with a little baby bird in it. One little baby bird. And it's going, opening its mouth, and I'm going, are you serious? Yeah. What am I going to do? The storage facility is a mile up the road. Mom and Dad bird are, what am I? We're going to be late. We got to go. And I'm going, oh my goodness. And I'm ashamed to admit this, but I said, the bird's just going to have to take its chances. The thing's got to learn to fly sometimes. It might as well be going down I-70 at about 70 miles an hour. It'll just provide lift for the wings. And then I heard my wife in my head sing, "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." It's one of her favorite songs, and I love to hear her sing it. And I thought, oh no, why does my wife sing that song? And so I thought, God cares about that little bird. So I finished filling it with gas. I drive back to the storage place very, very slow, very, very carefully. I pull into where it had been parked. I get out, and sure enough, there's the little bird still in the nest. And so I try very, very gently to get the bird nest off of the trailer hitch. Well, it's stuck on the trailer hitch. And I'm trying to get it off, and the little bird's trying to bite me. Trying to help the little guy. So finally, he jumps out of the nest. He's not old enough to fly, but he's old enough to run. So here I am. I finally get the nest off. I've got the nest in one hand, and I am chasing this crazy little bird all over the parking lot of the storage place. And every time I try to pick him up, he's trying to bite me. And I go, "I'm trying to help you." About that time, Mom and Dad find that I am chasing little son or daughter, whatever. So they start dive bombing me. I'm going, "I'm trying to help him. Will you leave me alone?" So I finally catch the little bird. I put it in the nest. I find a safe place for it that's kind of sheltered. And I walk away, and Mom and Dad come and care for the little bird. And I get in the motor home, and off we drive. Now, folks, I'm not a real compassionate person. But if I, as a human being, would care that much about that little bird, how much more God cares for us. His eye is on the sparrow. Joy and I could stand up here for hours and tell you story after story after story of how God has cared for us. Before we got married, a couple real quick stories. Joy and I went to Bob Jones University. We met second semester of our freshman year, and the first semester my parents paid for. My mother's a factory worker. My father was unemployed at the time, and they scrimped and saved every penny they could to pay one semester of college for me, and they sent me off to Bob Jones, and then basically I was on my own, and I worked as much as I could. And I think it was first semester of my sophomore year, I ran out of money. I had no money, and I'd been to the business office of the school, and they had extended it and extended it and extended it, and I finally got a call to come into the business office, and they told me, says, we're just really, really sorry, but you got to have X number of dollars by this Friday, or we're going to have to send you home. There's nothing else we can do. We're so very, very sorry. Well, Joy and I had just started dating, and we began praying. I didn't want to go home, and I hope she didn't want me to go home. And we began praying. And all week long, we'd go to the post office box and check, and there was nothing there. And finally, Friday came, and I think I had to have the money into the business office by 5 o'clock or whatever. And I didn't have it. I'd exhausted every resource I knew. And we went down to the post office box about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I checked my post office box. There's one envelope in there. I pull it out. It's got a return address from someone I've never heard of. I have no idea who in the world they are. I open the envelope, and it's a check for the exact amount that I needed to stay in school another semester. How do you explain that? I can't explain it, except for God. We have 3 adopted children. God's been so gracious to us. Our son that we're very, very close to now was the prodigal. Oh, boy, was he the prodigal. Oh, my goodness. When he was 14, 15, he began running away. He would run away, and Joy and I would panic because we didn't know where he was, what he was doing, and Joy would call the prayer chain in the church. She would call all of our friends, pray for Tim, he's gone, we don't know where he is. She would call the police, our son has gone away, and if we didn't hear from him, she would start calling all the emergency rooms around Columbus. Do you have anybody in the emergency room by the name of Tim Burney? And we would do that, and sooner or later he would come back home. But when he was 16, we came out to our car after church on Sunday night, and he had run away again. But this time, he had left a note on the steering wheel indicating that his life wasn't worth living, that he had just given up with life, and he was tired of life, and we would probably never see him again. We decided to do something different this time. We decided we would tell no one but God. We would call no one. We would tell no one. We would simply pray. We went home and basically prayed all night long. And about 5:30 in the morning, the phone rang and our heart just sank. What is this call at 5:30 in the morning? Hello, is this Mr. Burney? Yes. This is the Ohio Highway Patrol. Oh. And the man said, we have your son. Oh, praise God. Said, where was he? He was hitchhiking up I-71 north of Columbus, and of course that's illegal to hitchhike on an interstate. They said, we have him. What do you want us to do with him? We can bring him to your house, or he wants to go to a friend's house. He doesn't want to come home. And I said, that's okay. As long as he's safe, take him to his friend's house, and I'll go pick him up later in the day. And we hung up the phone, and Joy and I wept and thanked God that he was safe and we knew where he was. So later on that day, I went to his friend's house. His name was Ryan. I went up the door and said, hey, son, so glad you're safe. Let's go. He got in the car, and he was clearly agitated. He was angry. And I said, Tim, I'm just so glad you're alive, and your mother and I were so worried about you. He says, why do you always do that? I said, do what? He said, you call everybody. I wouldn't have done anything to myself. I would have come back. I would have been all, but you call people. You call people. I said, no, we didn't call anyone. We didn't tell a soul, not one person. He said, yes, you did. I said, no, we did not call a certain one person. I said, why do you say that? And he told me the story. He was hitchhiking up 71 north of Columbus. Highway patrolman pulls up in a patrol car, pulls up to him, rolls down the passenger side window, and he says, is your name Tim? My son said, yeah. And the highway patrol officer said this, get in the car, son. I've been looking for you all night. He knew our son's name, and he'd been looking for him all night long. I have no explanation, folks. I don't know whether the Spirit of God somehow supernaturally illuminated a highway patrolman to give him our son's name and tell him to look, or whether that was an angel of God dressed in a highway patrol suit. I have no idea. All I know is God protected our son. And not only do we know his name, and sometimes we did not know where he was, our God, our Father, knew his name and knew where to find him. And he knows your name, and your name, and your name, and he knows everything there is to know about us. The hairs of our head are numbered, and not a sparrow can fall without your Father. Not a sparrow can fall. Sometimes we just need to come and lay our burdens at the foot of the cross. You know? Sometimes we just need to come and say, God, I surrender. I can't take this anymore. I can't handle it. Well, God never intended for you to handle it. And maybe some of you tonight have been carrying a heavy load, and this message was for you. If his eye is on the sparrow, his eye is on you and your family and your health and your finances and your children. Maybe you've got the prodigal, and maybe you just need to surrender it and say, God, I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you that you care for me.